I think I've got trench foot.
And in my mother's womb was fashioned to be flesh in the time of 10 months, being compacted in blood of the seed of man.
That's right.
Of the seed of man.
The word seed is sperm, and sperm comes through having sex.
It's shut out of your father's rod,
right.
Put it in layman terms, in his penis.
That's right.
That means a man put his penis in a woman and bust off in it.
Then the angel said to him, "Take out the entrails of this fish, and lay up his heart and his gall and his liver for thee. For these are necessary for useful medicines."
The rest of the chapters of the book of Esther,
Go ahead.
which are found neither in the Hebrew nor in the Chaldee.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is busy playing with buttons, finally giving me a little time to record this. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and he's cats. Get over it. This is a Biblical Apocrypha episode where I, and in this case a guest, read part of a book from the Biblical Apocrypha. Next episode will be a news episode. Now, I'm recording this one in advance because when this goes up, I'll be at Secular Saturday in Chattanooga, home of the Trickle in a Cave. So that big alien invasion which happened on the 12th, I don't know anything about it yet. Nor have I heard about Trump being found in the hotel room with the dead sheep. But I'll all have to wait until I get back. My guest for this episode is Brother Brewer from the Skeptical Brewpub podcast, and we dive into 2nd Baruch, I don't know. This is a Jewish apocalyptic book, so it ought to be good. Anyway, since I did this thing ahead of time, I don't really have any news for you, so with all that out of the way, let's get started on this nightmare.
And this starts with verses 1 through 4, the announcement of the coming destruction. And it came to pass, in the 25th year of Jeconiah, king of Judah, that the word of the Lord came to Baruch, son of Neriah, and said unto him, "Have you seen that what all of the people are doing to me, that the evils which these 2 tribes which remained have done are greater than those of the 10 tribes which were carried away captive? For the former tribes were forced by their king to commit sin, but these 2 of themselves have been forcing and compelling their king to commit sin. For this reason, behold, I will bring evil upon this city and upon its inhabitants, and it shall be removed from before me for a time, and I will scatter its people among the Gentiles, that they may do good to the Gentiles, and my people shall be chastened, and the time shall come when they will seek for the prosperity of their times. For I have said these things to you, that you may bid Jeremiah and all those that are like you to retire from this city." Does that mean they're going to Florida?
I would think so.
"For your works of the city are as a firm pillar," kinky, "and your prayers are also strong." You want to take it?
Yep. "And I said, O Lord, my Lord, have I come into the world for this purpose, that I might see the evils of my mother?" Wow.
Ooh, I like it.
"Not so, my Lord.
Darn it.
If I have found grace in your sight, first take my spirit, that I may go to my fathers and not behold the destruction of my mother."
Alrighty then. I think maybe his gate goes both ways.
Could be. "For 2 things vehemently constrain me." He's into bondage. "For I cannot resist you." Insert Brokeback Mountain quote here.
"I just can't quit you."
"And my soul, moreover, cannot behold the evils of my mother." Damn, that's awfully misogynistic.
I'm telling you.
"But one thing I will say in your presence, O Lord. What, therefore, will there be after these things? For if you destroy your city and deliver up your land to those that hate us, how shall the name of Israel be again remembered? Or how shall one speak of your praises? Or to whom shall that which is in your law be explained? Or shall the world return to its nature of aforetime?
Is that like a foreplay?
I'm guessing. And the age revert to primeval silence. So...
Cue the crickets.
Yeah. And the multitude of souls be taken away, and the nature of man not again be named. And where is all that which you did say regarding us? What the fuck does that even mean?
It's like he's trying to communicate. But I just... Very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to pick up on the next one?
Yep.
Okay. And the Lord said unto me, This city shall be delivered up for a time, and the people shall be chastened during a time, and the world will not be given over to oblivion.
Damn.
Phew.
I am
Let's
disappointed.
see. I know it. Dost you think that this is a city which I said, On the palms of my hands have I graven you? Would that be Rosy Palm, maybe?
Yeah, I'm thinking so.
This building now built in your midst is not that which is revealed to me, that which prepared before here from all time when I took counsel to make paradise, and showed Adam before he sinned. But when he transgressed in the commandments, it was removed from him, and it's also paradise. And after these things I showed it to my servant Abraham, but not among the portions of victims. And again, I also showed to Moses on Mount Sinai when I showed the likeness of the tabernacle and its vessels. And now behold, it is preserved with me as paradise. Go therefore, as I do command you.
Some of that made sense, but...
Maybe.
Not a lot. And I answered and said, So then... I am destined to grieve for Zion, for your enemies will come to this place and pollute your sanctuary, and lead your inheritance into captivity, and make themselves masters of those whom you have loved. And they will depart again to the place of their idols, and will boast before them. And what will you do for your great name? And the Lord said unto me, My name and my glory are unto all eternity, and my judgment shall maintain its right in its own time. And you shall see with your eyes that the enemy will not overthrow Zion, nor shall they burn Jerusalem, but be the ministers of the judge for the time. But do you go and do whatsoever I have said unto you. What kind of tracks are you following? King tracks.
And I will hug him and pet him and squeeze him and call him George.
And I went tonight and took Jeremiah and Adu and Sariah and Jabesh and Gedaliah and all the honorable men of the people, and I led
Slick and Do Right and Clyde and Ace and Cleany and Bruce and Spot and Rover and my
brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl, and I led them to the valley of Kidron, and I narrated to them all that had been said to me, and they lifted up their voice, and they all wept, and we sat there and fasted until the evening.
All righty then.
Yeah.
That's I'm sorry, but that is starting to sound a lot like one of those Pentecostal sermons I used to sit through as a kid.
Oh.
You know, it was the only church I ever saw that was about the size of a garage, had about 20 people in it, and the preacher still felt like he needed a microphone and PA system to yell.
There is a Pentecostal church right across the street, basically, from the trailer park I live in, and it is the size of a garage.
Yep.
Never been in it, because I don't know what kind of Pentecostal you were. These are the ones that are considered by the snake handlers to be liberal.
Wow.
You know, the ones that, women can't wear makeup, can't do anything with their hair, can't wear pants. That's this type.
Yeah, I've seen those around here. No, ours were kind of like just a little bit south of Assembly of God. It was kind of a cross between Pentecostal and Jimmy Swaggart. So, yeah.
Did he get up on stage and cry about screwing hookers?
No, because actually he was my stepmom's uncle. So, yeah, everybody in this church was related.
Well, you know what they say, the closer the can.
Yeah, you can't keep it in your pants, keep it in the family.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. And now we're on verse 6 over here, or the red 6.
Yep.
Let's see. It says, and it came to pass, drink. Let's see, on the morrow that, lo, the army of the Chaldees surrounded the city, and at the time of the evening, I, Baruch, left the people, and I went forth and stood by the oak. And I was grieving over Zion, and lamenting over the captivity which had come upon the people. And lo, suddenly a strong spirit raised me, and bore me aloft over the wall of Jerusalem. Bent him over and breech-loaded him, I guess. I don't know.
Never heard the term breech-loading before in this context, but I grasp your meaning instantly.
And I beheld, and lo, 4 angels standing in the 4 corners of the city, each of them holding a torch of fire in his hand. And another angel began to descend from heaven and said to them, hold your lamps and do not light them until I tell you, because you might go blind. For I am first sent to speak a word to the earth and place in it what the Lord of the Most High has commanded me. And I saw him descend into the Holy of Holies and take from the veil. I just got to stop there because Holy of Holies. Do you ever watch the Charles Bronson movies as a kid?
I've seen parts of some of them.
There was one, and it was this one that he was going. It was called Kinjite, Forbidden Subject. And there was this Catholic schoolgirl that was on the bus, and this Japanese guy had went and groped her, and she said, he touched my Holy of Holies. So that scene just pops into mind right there. Let's see. And take from there the veil and the holy ark and the mercy seat and 2 tables and the holy raiment of the priests and the altar of incense and the 48 precious stones and a partridge in a pear tree, wherewithin the priest was adorned, and all the holy vessels of the tabernacle. And he spoke to the earth with a loud voice, earth, 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 hear the words of the mighty God, and receive what I commit you, and guard them until the last time, so that when you are ordered you may restore them, so that the strangers may not get possession of them. For the time comes when Jerusalem will also be delivered for a time. Until then it is again restored forever, and the earth opens its mouth and swallows them up. Well, at least it doesn't spit.
Yeah. Although some of the other Apocrypha books seem to indicate that Jesus was a spitter.
Yeah, well, what's it going to be? Spits or swallows?
Yeah. And after these things I heard that angel saying unto those angels who held the lamps, destroy, therefore, and overthrow its wall to its foundation, lest the enemy should boast and say, we have overthrown the wall of Zion, and we have burnt the place of the mighty God, and they have seized the place where I have been standing before. Yeah. God forbid the other guys get the credit.
Yeah, it wasn't the mighty army or the training of the soldiers. No, it was God that did it.
Yeah.
Let's see. And now the angels did as he commanded them. And when they had broken up the corners of the walls, a voice was heard from the interior of the temple after the wall had fallen, saying, enter, you enemies, and come, you adversaries, for he who kept the house has forsaken it. And I, Baruch, departed, and it came to pass, drink, after these things, that the army of the Chaldees entered and seized the house. and all that was around it. And they led the people away captive, and slew some of them, and bound Zedekiah the king, and sent him to the king of Babylon. So we'll kill you, and then we'll move you. See, we took him prisoner, but he's dead. Oh. Details.
And I, Baruch, came, and Jeremiah, whose heart was found pure from sins.
Boring.
Yeah. Who had not been captured in the seizure of the city, and we rent our garments. We wept and mourned and fasted 7 days. That'll solve the problem for sure.
Yeah, just don't eat and just cry and send your prayers to the Lord and your checks to P.O. Box 5000. Let's see. And it came to pass, drink. If you tried to follow that game, I think you'd die of alcohol poisoning at this point. Holy cow.
Pretty close.
This is almost as bad as the Book of Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. After 7 days, that the word of God came to me and said unto me, Tell Jeremiah to go support the captivity of the people unto Babylon. But do you remain here amid the desolation of Zion, and I will show you after these days what will befall at the end of days. And I said to Jeremiah as the Lord had commanded me, and he indeed departed with the people. But I, Baruch, returned and sat before the gates of the temple, and I lamented with the following lamentation over Zion, and said, Blessed is he who was not born, or he who having been born has died. But as for us who live, woe unto us, because we see the afflictions of Zion, and what has befallen Jerusalem. I will call the sirens from the sea, and you, Lilin, come you from the desert, and you, Shadim, and dragons from the forest. Have we crossed over into Game of Thrones?
It sounds like it.
Awake and gird up your loins unto the morning. Get your pants on. And take up with me the dirges, and make lamentations with me. Ye husbands, sow not again. Ugh. And, O earth, wherefore give you your harvest fruits. Keep within you the sweets of your sustenance. Okay, your turn.
All right. And thou, vine, why further do you give your wine? Because that's what the job of...
That's what vines or grapevines do?
Yep. For an offering will not again be made from there in Zion, nor will first fruits again be offered. And do ye, O heavens, withhold your dew, and open not the treasures of rain. And do thou, O sun, withhold the light of your rays. Nope. And do thou, O moon, extinguish the multitude of your light. For why?
Well, if the sun quits, then the moon quits.
Yeah, that's kind of how that works. Of course, that's if you believe that, there actually is a moon. And
yeah.
It's not some kind of satanic object in the sky.
Or maybe it was something from Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah.
For why should light rise again where the light of Zion is darkened?
Yep.
Okay. And then we let the bridegrooms not enter in, and let not the brides adorn themselves with garlands, and you women pray not that you may bear, and the barren shall above rejoice, and those who have no sons shall be glad, and those who have sons shall have anguish. For why should they bear in pain only to bury in grief? Or why again should mankind have sons? Or why should the seed of their kind again be named? Where is this mother of the where this mother is desolate, and her sons are led into captivity? From, let's see, where are we at?
Yeah.
From this time forward, speak not of beauty, and discourse not of gracefulness. So no more ballet. Moreover, you priest, take the keys of the sanctuary and cast them into the height of heaven, and give them to the Lord, and say, Guard your house thyself, for lo, we are found false stewards. We quit. And you virgins who weave fine linen and silks of gold and Ophir?
Yeah.
What's Ophir?
You got me. Let me see what the Googles say. Ophir is a port or region mentioned in the Bible, famous for its wealth. King Solomon received a cargo of gold, silver, sandalwood, pearls, ivory, and apes and peacocks from Ophir every 3 years.
Righty then. Okay, well, I guess this must be a very rich place then.
Yeah, and apparently nobody knows where the hell it is, because the next thing on the Wikipedia thing is theorized or conjectural locations. And it gives Africa, Asia, former Israeli settlement, Asia, or Americas, and then other assumptions. So, obviously, nobody
knows where the fuck it is.
Yep.
Take with haste all these things and cast them into the fire, that it may bear with him who made them, or that it may bear them to him who made them, and the flames send them to him who created them, lest the enemy get possession of them.
So, sort of like how Atlanta actually got burned.
Mm-hmm. Sherman's march to the sea.
Yeah, Sherman showed up, and the folks in Atlanta said, "Uh-oh, let's just torch everything before he walks through the gates."
Well, that's because he was torching everything behind him, too.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, so, well, we'll burn it first. Ha ha. I slit my own wrist so you can't kill me.
I assume you're familiar with the Bloom County comic strip?
Yes.
There was an episode where they were going to, Bill the Cat was going to be executed for being a traitor, and he tried to kill himself. And Steve Dallas was shaking him and yelling at him. It goes, "Do you know how stupid it would make us look if you were allowed to kill yourself before we executed you?" And that just pops into my head at this.
I will kill you until you die from it.
Okay, let's see here. "Moreover, I, Baruch, say this against you, Babylon." Now, here they use Babylon, but other places they use Chaldee. I do not understand why they alternate between the two of them.
Maybe the Chaldeans are working for the Babylonians, or
as far as I know,
sure.
As far as I know, the Chaldeans are Babylonians. I could be wrong. I've actually, because Dustin from the Atheist Nomads podcast, he was a theological student, so I've asked him about that, because this is like the umpteenth time this has come up, and whenever he sends me a reply, I'll mention it. But yeah, that's crazy. All right, let's see here. "If you had prospered, and Zion had dwelt in her glory, yet the grief to us had been great, that you should be equal to Zion. But now, lo, the grief is infinite, and the lamentation measureless. For lo, you are prospered, and Zion desolate. Who will be judge regarding these things, or to whom shall we complain regarding that which has befallen us? O Lord, how have you borne it? Our fathers went to rest without grief." Having dealt with people who are dying, no. Everybody's pretty much got some grief when they're dying.
Yeah.
"And lo, the righteous sleep in the earth in tranquility. For they knew not this anguish, nor yet had they heard of that which had befallen us." Well, they're dead. It's kind of hard for them to hear of anything.
Mm-hmm.
"Would that you had ears, O earth, and that you had a heart, O dust, that you might go and announce in Sheol, and say to the dead, Blessed are you more than we who live."
I'd rather be dead than be with you.
Yeah. Okay, I am not sure which of these things to take, because you got the left-hand side and the right-hand side, which are the same but different.
Yeah, I kind of got lost trying to figure out which end was up there.
Okay.
"But I will say this as I think, and I will speak against you, O land, which alt-right prospering, maybe? The noonday does not always burn, nor do the rays of the sun constantly give light."
Yes, they do.
Yeah, okay. Let's see. Do not expect land and hope that you will always be prosperous and rejoicing, and be not greatly uplifted and boastful, for assuredly in its own season shall the divine wrath awake against you, which now in long suffering is held in as it were by rains. And when I had said these things, I fasted for 7 more days.
Yeah.
Alrighty, he's really into this fasting thing.
Yeah. In one of the books of Tobit, guy fasts for like a month and then eats flowers and has all these hallucinations, and it's like, yeah, dude, we know what happened. You starved yourself and then you went and found yourself a bunch of opium poppies and chowed
Yep,
down.
that's what I was thinking. He hit the poppy plants.
And it came to pass, drink, after these things, that I, Baruch, was standing upon Mount Zion, and lo, a voice came from the height and said unto me, Stand upon your feet, Baruch, and hear the word of the mighty God. He just said he was already standing. So is this, for him to keep upright?
Maybe.
Is it like in, Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Don't grovel, Arthur. I can't stand groveling.
Or maybe it's that Baruch had a little bit of a height problem, and to stand. I am standing. Well,
I'd never thought of that possibility, but that works. Because you have been astonished at what has befallen Zion, you shall therefore be assuredly preserved to the consummation of the times, that you may be for a testimony. English motherfucker, can you speak it?
Something about consummating and then testifying about it, maybe in court.
Yeah.
I don't
know.
I did not have sexual relations with that bedpost.
I did not have sexual relations with my cousin.
Yeehaw!
She was my sister.
Mm-hmm.
So that if ever those prosperous cities say, Why hath the mighty God brought upon us this retribution? Say unto them, you and those like you who shall have seen this evil, this is the evil and retribution which is coming upon you and upon your people in its destined time, that the nations may be thoroughly smitten. And then they shall be in anguish. And if they say at that time, For how long? You will say to them, Ye who have drunk the strained wine, drink you also of its dregs, the judgment of the lofty one who has no respect of persons. Well,
but we've been drinking.
An asshole. I mean, if you don't respect people, you're kind of an asshole.
Yeah, pretty much.
On this account, he had aforetime no mercy on his own sons, but afflicted them as his enemies because they sinned. Then, therefore, were they chastened that they might be sanctified.
Alrighty then.
Yeah.
Beat me until I'm good. Hit me again, Ike, and put some steak on it.
But now, you peoples and nations, you are guilty, because you have always trodden down the earth and used the creation unrighteously. For I have always benefited you, except for, of course, when I sent the people to sack your city, carry off your populace, and enslave them.
What are you talking about? That was great entertainment. It was like Game of Thrones. That's like his own cable TV show right there.
And you have always been ungrateful for the benefits. Yeah, I can kind of see why.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, whip me, beat me, make me write bad checks. They'll hit me again.
Yeah.
Let's see. And I answered and said, Lo, you have shown me the method of the times, and that which shall be after these things, and you shall have said unto me that the retribution which has been spoken of by you shall come upon the nations. That's a hell of a run-on sentence there.
Yeah.
And now I know that those who have sinned are many, and they have lived in prosperity and departed from the world, but the few nations will be left in those times, to whom those words shall he said which you did say. Huh?
You got me.
For what advantage is there in this, or what evil, worse than what we have seen befall us, are we to expect to see? But again I will speak to your presence. What have they profited who have knowledge before you, and have not walked in vanity as the rest of the nations, and have not said to the dead, give us life? Huh? How did those always feared you, and have not left your ways, and lo, they have been carried off, nor on their account have you had mercy on Zion. And if others did evil, it was due to Zion, that on account of the works of those who wrought good works, she should have been forgiven, and should not be overwhelmed on account of the works whose wrought unrighteousness, but the works of the works work. But who, O Lord, my Lord, will comprehend your judgment, or who will search out the profoundness of your ways, or who will think of the weight of your path, or who will be able to think out your incomprehensible counsel? How do you comprehend the incomprehensible?
Got me.
Is that like one hand clapping? Or who of those that are born has ever found the beginning or end of your wisdom? For we have all been made like a breath. God, this guy is long-winded.
Yeah.
But for all the breath ascends involuntarily and again dies, so it is with the nature of men, who depart not according to their own will, and know not what will befall them in the end. For the righteous justly hope for the end, and without fear depart from this habitation, because they have with you a store of works preserved in treasuries. Okay, is this where they get this idea of all of the crowns in heaven and such? I'm kind of that just kind of crossed into my mind right then.
Yeah, got me.
Because you store treasures in heaven, and maybe that's where it pulls from. I don't know. But on this account also, these without fear leave this world, and trusting with joy, they hope to receive the world which you have promised them. But as for us, woe to us, who also are now shamefully entreated, and at time look forward only to evils. But you know accurately what you have done by means of your servants, for we are not able to understand which is good as you art, O Creator. But again I will speak in your presence, O Lord, my Lord. When of old there was no world with its inhabitants, did you devise and speak with a word, and forthwith the works of creation stood before you. And you did say what you would make for your world, man as the administrator of your works, that it might be known that he was by no means made on account of the world, but the world on account of him. And now I see that as for the world which was made on account of us, lo, it abides, but we on account of whom it was made depart. That sounds like a William Lane Craig argument.
Yeah, and
it really does.
And like almost all of that was just one sentence.
Could sum up the whole debate there in one sentence. Matter of fact,
yeah,
that he may have.
Yeah, that is some crazy ass shit.
I'm telling you.
I think we'll put a fork in that for now, because
yeah, I'm starting to get my words jumbled here.
Yeah, and it's
crazy shit.
It's not your fault. I mean, this is some word salad shit. If I
my god, this is as bad as trying to sit and read through the Apocrypha of John. Oy.
Okay, so why don't you tell everybody about your podcast?
Okay. Well, it's called Skeptics Brewpub. It's been on a little bit of a hiatus, but I'm going to be back this week. I've got an interview coming up with Thomas Smith and a few other fun things coming up. Like I was talking with you earlier about the Planned Parenthood interview and such. But you can find it at skepticsbrewpub.com or wherever your podcatchers go. Just search for Skeptics Brewpub and it should come up. And there's also the website or the Facebook page, facebook.com/Skeptics Brewpub or /Brother Brewer to find me. And yeah, that's pretty much how you get a hold of me.
Okay. And since you're a home brewer, I'm going to have this discussion with you because while I understand the general principles of brewing beer, I don't understand the specifics.
Okay.
I was, at Atheists in the Bar thing last weekend, and we went to a local tap room, which was started by a home brewer who decided he could make money off of it. And they had, I don't remember how many different beers on tap, but there was a number of them. And the thing about them was, I'm not really a beer drinker, but when I drink beer, I tend to prefer stouts. So, and that's mostly what I drink. So I will refer to that, although everybody else just about who was there with me had a similar reaction despite them drinking different styles of beer. Most of the beer was low alcohol, like 4.5%, something like that. But the stout that I had, it wasn't watery, but it was like, you're getting what you think is a Budweiser beer. But it actually, when you taste it, you realize this isn't Bud, this is Bud Light. And, not that it tasted like either of them, but that gives you an analog that you can relate to.
Okay, there wasn't like that nice, rich drink or taste that you usually get from a stout?
Yeah, right. I mean, there were the flavors there, but there weren't, it didn't have the intensity that I expected. It did have the correct kind of mouthfeel, so it wasn't like, well, I'm drinking water here. But it definitely it didn't have, a flavor punch to it. There was.
Okay.
So what did they do?
Well, it could be. There's a couple of different things that it could have been, because a lot of the stout profile, part of it comes from the malt that they're using. If they were using just enough malt to give it the darkness, but not enough to give it that rich flavor, that could do it. But also, there's other times where people will use the same yeast because different yeasts give it a different character. So if they were trying to use like a strain of yeast that's usually used for like the IPAs or the lighter beers, it would also give it that, because for a stout, you want a more English style yeast to it. There are like different strains of yeast, and so that may also have been what was off on it. At least that's my opinion, because with a stout, you definitely want to use British yeasts, which give it a more almost like a sometimes it's like a tobacco flavor into it,
or this had a bit of a coffee flavor to it. So.
Okay, that would have been probably, they may have used just enough of the dark malts to give it that coffee flavor, but if they didn't use the right yeast with it, that would definitely affect the flavor.
Yeah. And one of the people I was with, she got a flight of beers. And, they were all fairly lackluster. Some of them were, there were 2 stouts or really dark beers. I know one of them was a stout. I'm not sure about the other. And then there were a couple of, there were some lighter beers. And they were all better than drinking, something like Budweiser or Miller. But they didn't really have the kind of deep flavor that you expect from, a craft beer.
Right. And again, I would probably blame the yeast would probably have a big factor in it, but also the water quality, because your stouts and your darker beers, they usually have a more harder water profile, where the lighter beers tend to work towards the less calcium in them. So it's like a more distilled type of water, like the Pilsens. It's real soft water. So if they were using water that was too soft for the beer, that could also affect it. Really hard to tell without actually tasting it myself.
Right. I understand.
But I mean, those are probably the things that I would blame the most on. It would be either the yeast or the water profile, that it wasn't quite right for the style.
Yeah. Now, I like I said, there were a couple of home brewers there, and I was going to ask them, but they loved the beer that the place produced, so you can't exactly say, why the hell does this taste like shit compared to this other tap room? And they had been to the other tap room, so they knew what its beer was like.
Well, they could have also been being nice too, because you don't want to, I mean, when I went to Little Rocktoberfest a couple years ago, there was one guy that had this holiday beer that was a spice beer, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that his beer tasted like a chewed up cigar. I just couldn't tell him.
Well, these guys claim to be regulars at the establishment, so you can't exactly. They apparently liked it. So, since you brought up the characteristics of the water, I have a question for you. I grew up on well water.
Yes.
And the well water I grew up on had a really hard iron content. So what would that do to a beer?
That would give it a flavor profile that would be. You ever chewed on pennies?
Yes.
That would be the kind of the that would give you an off flavor, kind of like having a bunch of pennies in your mouth. It's just that kind of arched metallic taste to it. So you don't want the iron, the calcium. Like I said, if you're brewing the harder, or the darker beers like stouts and porters, then that's good, because that's a profile similar to Dublin, Ireland.
Yeah.
But if you're going for the lighter beers, you want soft water. The softer, the better.
Okay. And I tend to prefer, hard liquor like whiskey and scotch over beer. But I mean, I can appreciate a good beer. There's a couple of local places that do really good beers. So the thing I have noticed is that I tend not to like IPAs. My limited understanding is that IPAs are hoppier than regular beers. Is that right?
Yes, very much so. I'm not sure if it's a fact or not, because it's been kind of disputed back and forth. But one of the things that they've said about the IPAs, which stands, of course, for India Pale Ale originally.
Right.
When the British would ship the beers to India, that's a pretty long voyage by ship. And hops, along with being a bittering agent, which makes the beer taste less like syrup, are also an astringent. So they would help preserve the beer. And so if it's going to be on a long journey like that, you would hop the shit out of them. I mean, just as much hops as you could put into them. And then by the time it got to wherever it was going, the hop flavor would have actually dispersed a little bit.
Right.
And it wouldn't be so bad. But that was where the IPA got started. And of course, Americans, we got to make everything bigger. And we have taken that style and have basically made it the hoppier the better. For me personally, I don't mind a good IPA as long as it's got a good balance between the malt and the hops. I don't like drinking it and feel like I'm drinking hop tea. I want to get some of that sweetness of the malt in there too.
Yeah.
So, but that's just me.
Okay. So, if somebody was going to get started on brewing their own beer, not that I'm going to, I mean, if I'm going to break out the kinds of equipment needed to make my own alcohol, I'm going to build myself a still. But where would you recommend that they start out?
Well, I would definitely first start with your a local homebrew store if you can find one, if you have one in your area, because you'll be able to ask questions. The people that own homebrew stores generally are homebrewers themselves, so they know a little bit about what they're talking about. But if you don't have one local, just about any of the online big retailers, like I would recommend High Gravity out of Tulsa, Steve's Homebrew Shop, the ones that were just bought out, believe it or not, by Anheuser-Busch, InBev, Northern Brewer, and Midwest Brewer, or Midwest Brewing, are both really good ones that have, they have a wealth of knowledge on their web pages. You can chat with them or email them to ask them questions, but I would definitely go local first. Look in your area, and just like the one that I have closest to me is also a hydroponic store. So,
okay, now explain to me, because this is a term that has just suddenly cropped up. The whole high gravity thing.
Okay, gravity is basically referring to. You've heard of specific gravity,
right?
Okay, that's generally what it's talking about. It's talking about the amount of sugars that are dissolved into what's called a wort. Which is basically beer before it's fermented. So the higher the gravity, the more sugars that are available for the yeast to eat, which is going to create a higher alcohol content. But if the yeast can't eat it all, it's also going to give it, if it is not able to eat all of that sugar and convert it to alcohol, it's going to give it a sweetness. But yeah, generally when you hear about high gravity, that's talking about how much sugar has been dissolved into the wort for the yeast to be able to handle.
Okay. I had heard the term, and I had a vague grasp that it was tied to the alcohol levels, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, basically yeast, what they do is they eat the sugar and they shit alcohol and carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
So a lot of, I don't know if you've seen like Boulevard Brewing. When they bottle their beers, they'll actually add a little bit of yeast into the bottles, and some home brewers do this too, rather than trying to have the whole complicated bottling system. And the yeast will carbonate the beer for them. They just let it sit for another 2 or 3 weeks in the bottle, and then they can pop it and it's carbonated.
Nice. I know. I mean, like I said, I know some of the stuff about this, about brewing. I find a lot of the history in brewing beer fascinating. Like, brewing beer led to the discovery of carbon dioxide.
Mm-hmm. It's also, some people, there are some anthropologists and sociologists that actually think that the whole agriculture revolution, where we went from being hunter-gatherers to farmers, started because of beer.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I can actually buy that. And I know that I think it's Ethiopia, some part of Africa, they did an excavation and they figured out that there was a beer the locals were brewing thousands of years ago that was antibiotic.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted to try the beers that they've figured out how they were made by the Egyptians, and they've tried to recreate them as best they could. I've always wanted to try those.
I think Stone makes a few of those. There's one actually. There was in Syria. It's an excavation that they just did on one of the cities in Syria, and they found a brewery. Or it basically was like a home brewery, because back then it was the wives that did the brewing.
Yeah.
But they found it, and it dated back, I want to say, 5,000 years.
That sounds a little young, actually. I mean, it
was back. It was back a pretty good ways that they found this, and the folks from Stone actually were given samples from it, and they were able to recreate the beer that was being drunk by the ancient Assyrians.
Nice.
Because those were the guys that actually introduced beer to the Egyptians. They had a goddess of beer, and the punishment if you brewed a bad batch of beer was you were beheaded.
Well, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I mean, having drunk Milwaukee's Beast, I can firmly say a bad batch of beer is worthy of beheading.
Yeah, friends don't let friends drink shitty beer.
Oh, God. I had a German roommate in college, and, I mean, he was in his 30s when we were living together in the dorm, and he'd moved to the States when he was a teenager, so he knew beer and knew how to drink. And, you know, one time we were low on money, he's like, well, we'll get this, and the next day, you know, we regretted having bought a case of the Beast, and he's like, we'll never do that again.
Yeah, Milwaukee's Beast or PBR. And for some reason, hipsters have made PBR popular again.
Oh, God. When I was a kid, the only people I knew who drank PBR were my white trash cousins. And when I say white trash, I mean they let their, you know, kids who were like 10 and 11 smoke cigarettes. So, and, you know, they were the only ones we knew who drank PBR. And then, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago or so, I was working at a convenience store, and this guy plunks down a case of PBR on the counter, and I'm like, I didn't know that they still made this shit, and why in God's name are you drinking it? And he's like, it's pretty good beer.
Yeah, okay. While we're at it, why don't you go ahead and take some of this Coors Light while you're at it? See, even my father was, when he was a drinker, would drink Busch. You know, that was at least a little bit better than PBR. Yeah. Not much, but
well, you know how Busch beer came about, don't you? Okay, so what's his name? Anheuser the second, or, you know, whoever, before they sold out to InBev, right? It was like the second, because I think it's the third Busch guy who sold out to InBev, but which his father or grandfather worked out a deal with a sports team to, you know, put his name on the stadium. He wanted to have it be the Budweiser Stadium, and they said, we're not going to let you do that. We don't want this to be seen as advertising.
Sounds like the Cardinals.
Yeah, but you can put, you know, the family name of Busch on the stadium. And he, you know, he's like, okay, that'll work. And he, you know, cut the check, and then on the way home, stopped, found a payphone, called his office, and said, we need to make a new beer. I don't care what kind of beer it is, but it has to have the name Busch.
Yep, sounds about right.
And that's how it came about. Or, if we want to go all Book of Mormon, that's how it came to pass.
Drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that also the lager beers, which are what the American beers, well, the popular ones like Busch, Budweiser, and such are based on, actually didn't become popular in this country until about the middle of the 19th century, when the Germans started coming in masse, you know, and started immigrating and building their own breweries, because they're based on a lager, which is, I don't know if you know, but there's two types of beer. There's ale and lager.
Yeah. And
lagers, because they ferment at a lower temperature, closer to freezing, they are a cleaner beer, and so they don't have as much of the yeast flavor as ales do. And so they started to become more popular in the States because they were that cleaner, crisper flavor. And it actually put quite a few breweries, American breweries, out of business, and they tried to come up with things to compete with it. But eventually it died out, and that's why what we see now is what's called the American adjunct lager is the dominant beer in America.
Yeah. I know somebody has theorized that the reason why the British prefer their beer at warmer temperatures than the rest of the civilized world is because the yeast they were using were shut down at colder temperatures, so they couldn't brew beer in the winter, whereas the Germans, their yeasts worked just fine in cold weather, so they could brew beer all year round, and people decided they liked the stuff cold.
Yeah, well, actually, the lager, that's the lager yeast versus the ale yeast. Germans actually stopped brewing just after March, and then they store it. And that's why Oktoberfest beers, the other name for them is Marzen, which is the German word for March, because that's when they have to cut off brewing until about September, when the temperatures get right for them to be able to brew with that yeast again. But another thing that, I don't know if you've noticed this with colder temperatures, it tends to deaden your taste buds. That's another reason why cold beer in America is so popular, because trying to drink warm bud, it's nasty.
Yeah.
But if it's cold, you don't taste the nastiness as much. It actually is, it's easier to get down, and that's why cold beer is so popular. Is because it deadens the flavor, so you can brew a bad beer and serve it, and nobody notices because it's cold.
Oh. But at the same time, I like good whiskey, and I like it really cold. Mm-hmm. And it's not because it deadens the taste. I just like it cold.
Yeah. Well, there's also in whiskeys and such, the reaction, that burning sensation, is they've actually found that it's a similar reaction as when you eat a hot pepper.
Really?
Except for instead of hitting in the mouth, it does that in your esophagus, and that's why you get that burning sensation. Huh. And have you ever heard the term skunk beer?
Yes.
You know what that's from?
Because when you pop open the top, it smells like a skunk.
No, what actually happens is that when beer is exposed to sunlight or ultraviolet light, the hops break down, and the chemical that is released in its place is the exact same chemical that skunks use to make their smell.
Really?
And so you pop the beer, and it literally smells like a skunk. So that's why beers come in most good beers come in the darker bottles, so that it kills, or it keeps most of that ultraviolet light from penetrating and creating that reaction.
Yeah, I knew that the darker colored bottles protected the beer. I didn't realize it was the same chemical. That's interesting. Mm-hmm. On the topic of skunks, I have to walk to work, and for a while there was a dead skunk carcass on the side of the road.
Oh.
Well, the thing that got me was the first time I walked past it was probably like a day or so after it had been hit. So it was kind of pungent, but not real bad. However, as it decayed and there was less and less of the skunk carcass there, the smell got worse and worse, and it was the skunk smell, not rotting flesh smell. Mm-hmm. And that was just, I found that really weird, because it's like, wow, you would think that this odor would go away and you'd be overwhelmed by rotting flesh, but the farther away, I could, in my walks, the farther away I was every morning, I could smell it. It's like,
Well, on the subject of roadkill, do you guys have possums in your area?
Oh yeah, I used to have one that lived under the trailer.
How about armadillos?
They are in Tennessee. I haven't seen any, but they are migrating this way thanks to good old-fashioned global warming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they moved up here from Texas. Yeah. But one thing about armadillos is there's a joke. Do you know why the possum crossed the road?
Nope.
To show the armadillo it could be done. Because the armadillos in this area, they've got this strange thing that when they're startled, they jump. And so if a car, even if you try to miss the armadillo by, getting it right between the wheels so that all the wheels miss the car, it actually jumps up and gets killed because it hits through the floorboard of your car.
Well, you know another nickname for armadillos, don't you?
Cajun bowling.
Texas speed bumps.
Well, I know when I was in Louisiana, they talked about there was a game that they would play where they'd actually take the armadillos by the tail and roll them across the yard.
There was a guy, we had an article, and this was ballpark 10 years ago, in the local paper, well, the Nashville paper, talking about, how armadillos were being seen more and more in this area, and, global warming was to blame for it. Mm-hmm. And the guy I worked with, he was like, oh, man, I'd love to have one of these as a pet. And it's like, dude, they carry leprosy.
Yep.
He's like, I don't care. I mean, now, naturally, something like 90% of the human population is naturally immune to leprosy, but it's still not exactly something you want to risk.
Yeah, and armadillos are actually the only other animal that can carry the leprosy bacteria.
Yeah, that I did not know.
Yep, believe it or not, that's why they actually carry it in their foot pads.
That's fascinating, really.
Yeah, the stuff that you learn living out here in the hills.
Yeah. Yeah, buddy. I can tell you, and I'm sure you would have the same stories as me.
Yeah, we've got. I mean, when you're in an area like this that's so isolated for so long, I mean, my grandparent or my stepmom's parents didn't have running water until probably the mid 80s. They had a well in their backyard that they would pull water from. They had an outhouse, and they lived within the city limits.
Yeah, there was a guy I worked with who he was about 30 years older than me, and I knew him roughly 10 years ago. And, he grew up in a house in this area, and he didn't have running water. Mm-hmm. And, his family was horrifically poor. He talked about how when he was a kid, his mother would buy chitlins at the butcher, and she would take them home and wash them in the creek behind the house.
Mm-hmm.
And in the town I grew up in Ohio, so civilization, sort of. But there was a the road I grew up on, they didn't have electricity until World War II. Of course, there wasn't anybody living on that road full time at that point. There was like a hunter cabin and maybe one house on the road at that time. Mm-hmm. But like in the general town I lived in, there was a woman in the 80s who did not have electricity, and she grew up before they had electrified the area, and when they came through, was part of the WPA program during the Depression and offered to wire up her house. She said, no, I've lived without electricity all these years. I can live without it the rest of my life. And, when I met her, that was 50 years after the WPA, so she... and she was pushing 80 or so, or 90 or something at that point, if not over 90.
Yep, I knew a lady that made her own soap still. Yeah, we actually, as a school project, we went out and watched her make soap in her backyard.
Well, you've heard of the Foxfire books.
Yep.
Yeah, the guy that did those lived in Georgia, and he was like, well, I'm worried these old ways will die out, so he started doing the Foxfire books, and then a few years ago got busted for having sex with an underage.
Yeah, that seems to happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
He wasn't part of the clergy, was he, by any chance?
Not well. He's from Georgia, so there's a chance. There's a good chance. Yeah. Speaking of.
Did you see that thing about what happened over at the Vatican this week?
Oh, you mean the gay sex orgy that got busted up?
Yeah.
Well, I
think that was a going away party for Cardinal Pell.
Well, that the largest gay sauna in Rome, if not all of Europe, is owned by the Catholic Church.
Does not surprise me.
And not only that, the priests have apartments above the sauna.
Oh.
It's like, can you be a little more obvious, please?
Probably they could. They probably could. I mean, they're constantly wearing dresses in service.
Yeah, but there apparently, I don't speak Italian, so I can't read the news accounts. But apparently, it's like, yeah, that's where all the muckety mucks from the church go.
Well, when I was still in the church, this Episcopal church that I went to, they had a Latino ministry, and what wound up happening is that a gentleman moved up here that had been a Catholic priest in, I think, not in Argentina, but in another South American country down there.
Yeah.
And he decided to relinquish his vows and get married. And he was out of work, and so the Episcopal Church just kind of scooped him up and made him a priest there. But he was talking about how most of the priests that he was friends with down in South America were like, why are you leaving the church? Just keep her on the side like the rest of us do.
Yeah, have you seen Spotlight?
Yes.
Okay.
That was a good movie.
Yeah. Well, where he talks about, there's a scene where he the expert on Catholic priests and sex, who was a former Catholic priest, he mentions something about that. I forget the exact number, but there's a significant percentage in the double digits of Catholic priests who are getting it on the side, and then out of that percentage, there's a significant percentage, which, let's face it, when you're dealing with the subject of child rape, any number above 0 is bad. There's a significant percentage of them who are, raping kids.
Yeah. Well, that whole thing about celibacy, that was actually over. It wasn't because of piety.
No, it was it was a way to ensure that the assets of a family were transferred to the church during the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it was to keep church property within the church, because if the priest got married, then the wife would be, eligible for the stuff, and because the Eastern Orthodox Church allows its priests to be married, but they cannot become bishops.
Yeah, and there, for centuries the church never really had a policy on celibacy at all, and then suddenly developed one.
Yeah. Thank you, St. Paul.
Yeah, well, as St. Augustine said, Lord, give me purity and chastity, but not yet.
Yeah, he was actually a Manichaean before he converted.
Yeah, I'd read that.
He liked his women.
He liked a lot of things. He also he swore up and down that there was a tribe in Africa whose faces were in their stomachs.
Well, he also had mommy issues, so that was...
Oh, well, a lot of them did.
Yeah, he had a definite Oedipus complex going on.
Yeah. All right, well, I've eaten up about 2 hours of your time, so...
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fosnuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.